The Caribbean Sea is a place of turquoise waters, golden beaches, and endless horizons. For many, it's the world of adventure, rum, and buried treasure, a place immortalized by Hollywood through tales of Jack Sparrow, ghost ships, and cursed gold. But behind the fantasy lies a darker, grittier, and far more fascinating truth. This is the real story of the pirates of the Caribbean, men and women who lived by their own rules, defied empires, and shaped history through blood, trade, and rebellion. Today, we separate myth from reality and explore the true age of piracy that once terrorized the world's richest seas. Our journey begins in the early 1600s, a time when the Caribbean was the prize jewel of European empires. Spain had claimed vast territories, from Cuba and Hispaniola to Panama and the coasts of South America, controlling trade routes that carried unimaginable wealth back to Europe. Gold, silver, sugar, and tobacco flowed through these waters aboard heavily guarded treasure fleets. But where there was wealth, there were those willing to take it. The Caribbean became the stage for an international struggle for riches and power. Pirates, privateers, and buccaneers turned these seas into a battlefield. Hollywood paints pirates as free spirits, reckless adventurers who roam from port to port with a sword in one hand and a bottle of rum in the other. The reality, however, was more brutal. Life at sea was harsh, unforgiving, and short. Most pirates were former sailors, soldiers, or escaped slaves, men cast out by society, seeking fortune or revenge. Disease, starvation, and execution were constant companions. Yet despite these dangers, thousands joined the ranks, drawn by the promise of freedom and plunder. To understand piracy, we must first understand its roots. The earliest Caribbean pirates were not outlaws in the modern sense. They were privateers, legal pirates sanctioned by their governments. England, France, and the Netherlands issued letters of marque, giving captains permission to attack Spanish ships and settlements during wartime. Men like Sir Francis Drake and Henry Morgan were national heroes, celebrated for stealing from Spain in the name of their kings and queens. But when peace returned, those same men were often abandoned, their commissions revoked, their crews unpaid. Many turned to piracy full-time, keeping the same ships, the same weapons, and the same lust for plunder. Only now, they sailed under the black flag. The word buccaneer came from the French buccaneer, hunters who smoked meat on Caribbean islands. Many were outcasts living on Hispaniola and Tortuga, hunting wild pigs and cattle until Spanish patrols drove them away. Forced to sea, they became pirates. From these rough beginnings grew an entire culture of lawless seafarers, forming floating republics where every man had a vote and loot was shared equally, a radical form of democracy in an age of monarchs. By the late 1600s, piracy had spread across the Caribbean like wildfire. The English port of Port Royal in Jamaica became the epicenter of this new underworld. Dubbed the wickedest city on earth, Port Royal was filled with taverns, brothels, and gambling dens. Ships arrived daily, their holds heavy with stolen Spanish treasure. It was here that some of history's most notorious pirates rose to infamy. Henry Morgan, a Welsh privateer turned pirate, led devastating raids on Spanish strongholds, sacking Panama in 1671 and earning knighthood from the English crown for his success. His story inspired countless pirate legends, and Hollywood loosely echoed his exploits in characters like Captain Jack Sparrow and Hector Barbossa. But unlike their cinematic counterparts, Morgan's raids were no playful adventures. They were brutal sieges marked by torture, murder, and fire. As the 18th century dawned, the so-called Golden Age of Piracy began. Between 1690 and 1730, hundreds of pirate ships roamed the seas, not just in the Caribbean, but across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. This was the era of the real legends. Edward Teach Better, known as Blackbeard, Charles Vane, the sadistic pirate captain, Calico Jack Rackham, famed for his flamboyant clothes, and the two most famous female pirates, and Bonny and Mary Red. Hollywood may show us charming rogues and cursed treasures, but these figures were far more complex, part rebels, part criminals, and part survivors of a harsh world. Blackbeard remains the most iconic. With his long black beard braided with slow-burning fuses, he terrified sailors without firing a shot. His flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a captured French vessel armed with 40 cannons. Teach used fear as a weapon, blockading Charleston Harbor in 1718 and holding an entire city hostage for medical supplies. But contrary to legend, there's no evidence that Blackbeard buried treasure or possessed supernatural powers. In truth, he was a calculating strategist who preferred intimidation over slaughter. His career ended in blood when the British Navy ambushed and killed him off the coast of North Carolina. His severed head was hung from a ship's bowsprit, a grim warning to others. and Bonny and Mary Read, two women who disguise themselves as men to live among pirates, have been romanticized endlessly. But their real stories were even more astonishing. Anne, born in Ireland, fled an arranged marriage and joined Calico Jack Rackham's crew. Mary, disguised as a man from youth, had served in the army before turning pirate. Together, they fought, plundered, and defied every expectation of their time. Captured in 1720, they narrowly escaped execution due to pregnancy, and their ultimate fates remain shrouded in mystery. Their defiance inspired later portrayals of fierce, independent pirate women in modern cinema. Hollywood's version of pirates, typified by Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean series, draws inspiration from these historical figures, but it transforms them into swashbuckling heroes and supernatural adventurers. The cursed Aztec gold, the immortal cruise, and the eccentric charm of Jack Sparrow are pure fiction. In reality, pirates lived short, violent lives. Their ships were cramped and disease-ridden. The code they lived by was not about romance, but survival. Pirate articles dictated strict discipline. Desertion could mean marooning, theft from a comrade, death. Yet they also guaranteed equality and shared wealth, principles unheard of in the rigid hierarchies of naval fleets and empires. One of the most striking myths is the idea of buried treasure. While popularized by stories like Treasure Island, real pirates rarely buried their loot. Gold and silver were quickly spent in the debauched ports of the Caribbean. Money was for drinking, gambling, and fleeting pleasures, not for hoarding. What they truly valued was freedom. Freedom from kings, captains, and the suffocating rules of society. The Golden Age ended almost as quickly as it began. By the 1720s, European powers, tired of losing ships and treasure, launched a massive crackdown. The Royal Navy hunted pirates relentlessly. Dozens were captured and publicly executed in ports like Kingston, Nassau, and London. Gallows stood tall as warnings. By the mid-18th century, piracy had largely disappeared from the Caribbean. The age of sail gave way to empire, and the real pirates faded into legend. Yet the idea of the pirate never truly died. It evolved. From romantic novels of the 19th century to the blockbuster films of the 21st, the pirate became a symbol of rebellion, a figure who defies authority, lives by their own code, and sails wherever the wind takes them. Hollywood gave us immortals, cursed treasures, and ghosts of the sea. But the truth is more human, and in many ways, more extraordinary. Behind every myth lies a man or woman who risked everything for a taste of freedom. Pirates were sailors betrayed by the system, slaves who seized their destiny, adventurers seeking fortune, and outlaws who built their own world in defiance of kings and empires. Their republics, like the one at Nassau, embodied ideals of equality, democracy, and autonomy long before such ideas took root on land. In their rough, lawless way, they dreamed of a life unchained, and that, perhaps, is why they continue to fascinate us today. Even their flags, the infamous Jolly Roger, carried meaning. Far from a universal skull and crossbones, each captain had his own design. Blackbeard's flag showed a skeleton holding a heart and spear, a warning of no mercy. Calico Jack's simple skull and crossed swords became the most famous version. These flags were not just symbols of terror, but declarations of independence, a signal to the world that they feared no nation, no god, and no law but their own. When we compare Hollywood's romanticized depictions to history, we see exaggeration and distortion, but also echoes of truth. Jack Sparrow's cunning mirrors Blackbeard's psychological warfare. The Brotherhood of Pirates reflects the real equality of the ship's crew. And the cursed gold of cinematic legend represents the real curse of greed that consumed empires and men alike. The difference is that the true story needs no fantasy to be thrilling. It's a tale of power, freedom, and defiance on the high seas, one that changed the world. By the 1730s, the last great pirate, Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, met his end in battle. He had captured over 400 ships and lived by a strict code of conduct, forbidding gambling, forbidding women aboard, and dividing plunder fairly. His death marked the final chapter of the Golden Age. But even as the hangman's rope silenced the last of the buccaneers, their legend was just beginning. Riders and sailors carried their tales across oceans, turning history into myth. Centuries later, those myths would reach the silver screen. Hollywood reimagined piracy as adventure, turning horror into humor and chaos into charm. Pirates of the Caribbean, Treasure Island, and countless others brought life to old names, but with new faces. While these films may not tell the truth, they keep alive the spirit of resistance that defined the real pirates. The sea remains a symbol, vast, untamed, and free, just as it was to those who once called it home. Today, relics of the pirate age rest beneath Caribbean sands and shallow waters. Shipwrecks off the coasts of Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Cuba hold silent testimony to lives spent chasing fortune and freedom. The artifacts, cannons, coins, personal items, reveal more than myth ever could. They tell of hunger, courage, cruelty, and hope. Archaeologists uncover these remnants not to glorify crime, but to understand an era when ordinary people seized history's helm, even for a brief moment. In the end, the real pirates of the Caribbean were not cursed immortals or charming rogues. They were sailors, mercenaries, and fugitives who lived in a world ruled by empire and greed. Their stories have been distorted, romanticized, and adapted for centuries. But behind every myth lies a trace of truth. They challenged authority, defied nations, and briefly created their own societies on the edge of the known world. When Hollywood turns these men and women into legends, it blurs history, yet it also keeps their memory alive. The sea battles, the treasure hunts, and the black flags may have changed form, but the fascination endures. From the archives of history to the big screen, the pirates of the Caribbean remain symbols of rebellion, danger, and freedom, not as fantasy, but as part of our shared past. The Golden Age of Piracy may have ended nearly 3 centuries ago, but its legacy continues to sail on, not in the waves of the Caribbean, but in the stories we tell about them. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more historical documentaries and legendary stories from around the world.